Hey there everybody, my name is Kat Bowser. I'm your resident fantasy therapist and welcome back to my channel. Those of you here for the first time, welcome. My name is Kat Bowser. I'm a licensed therapist. I'm also a writer working on my first two novels, one the start of a series, one a standalone. And on my channel I like to talk about what I consider to be the heart of writing, and that's the characters. And the heart of the characters is their psychology. So that's the angle I like to take with pretty much everything I talk about on my channel. So first and foremost, I apologize. My videos have been late this week. As some of you know, my old camera died. It was my laptop camera, yay. But I have figured out how to use my iPhone camera, but the processing time is a beast, so it's thrown off my schedule quite a bit. So I am gonna shift my days, so I'm gonna be uploading on Sundays and on Wednesdays. I should have some extra videos for you this week because I'm sorry that it took me so long to get these out. That being said though, let's just jump into the topic of today. And today I wanted to jump back into my trope diagnosis series, which is where I take a popular trope and I talk about essentially the psychology behind it. And one that I wanted to talk about today, I'm not sure why the topic came up, but it's an interesting one and it shows up in pretty much every single genre, and that is the ultimate sacrifice. So ultimate sacrifice is essentially a scenario where a character takes it upon himself to sacrifice his life either to fulfill the mission or to allow his comrades to escape or to defeat whatever the great obstacle is. And I think this one is interesting because when we think about the prospect of giving up our life for someone else or for a cause or for a mission, psychologically this kind of confuses us, mainly because on a psychological level the mind is always trying to promote essentially your genes carrying on. That is kind of the purpose biologically of your existence. But I think that it's interesting because this calls into the difference that bonds can make in someone's life. And let's talk about that a little bit. So those of you who've seen my other videos know that some of my favorite tropes are the ones where characters bond with one another. The found family, the mama bear, papa wolf, those kind of things. I love those types of things because I like to see characters form links with people that they aren't necessarily blood related to, and it just makes it more emotionally satisfying for me. And on a psychological level, it's interesting because when you create an emotional bond with someone, it has an immense effect on not just how you view the person, but also how, as weird as it sounds, how your brain views a person. I think a lot of times humans kind of get a bad rap. We're kind of, most of the time when you ask someone, well, what is a human's first instinct, they're going to say we're selfish. And on one level, they're right. We can be very selfish creatures. But what they found that I think is very interesting is that if they look, when we're looking at people that are in a relationship, like let's say, I'm going to say it could be either romantic or it could be a strong platonic. It really doesn't matter. But they're in an established relationship. What they found research-wise is that people who follow their first impulse, so by that I mean, like, when asked if you're going to do what your first impulse is, or if you're going to try and spare your partner's feelings, whatever. People who follow their first impulse are more likely to have a lasting relationship. And what's interesting is your first impulse is usually an unselfish one. It's usually, from the research they've done, it typically is, your first impulse is to be unselfish and to help and promote your partner. And I think that's very fascinating because most of the time I think we assume it would be the opposite, but in most cases that's just not true. And if we look at the concept of a sacrifice, of dying to save someone else or to save a mission or whatnot, it does go against what we would think would be the biological impulse, which is, to survive, to live. But what they found is that it's more making sure that your ideals and your genes move on. And what happens, and this is why I brought up those bonds things, is when you form an emotional bond with someone, like a strong emotional bond, whether it be platonic or romantic, as far as your brain is concerned, those people have your genes. Like, as far as your brain can comprehend, these people, whether they share blood with you or not, they have your genes. So your brain figures, okay, if I'm going to die, at least they're going to live, and they're going to carry my genes on. The fact that you have no blood link to them does not matter. The emotional bond is what promotes this feeling of sacrifice. And I really like that. I think it's fascinating because humans by nature, we're very social creatures as a general rule. So we form bonds and kinship and connection with one another. So I think on that level, it makes sense that you do not necessarily have to share blood to have this impulse to protect one another. And what's interesting is this can also be expanded to the human race as a whole, although that is a little more rare. But I'm talking about, I'm talking about the stories where the hero makes this ultimate sacrifice to save the world or whatever. They have found that people will, in some scenarios, give their life to save a stranger. Most of the time it's a child. That seems to have a stronger impact than, say, another adult. Although, as with anything in psychology, this is not necessarily a no flaws scenario. I'm just talking in general. And they think that extends to essentially this idea of kinship with fellow man being an extension of that emotional bond of these people share my ideals and my genes. And again, your brain kind of interprets it as just as if they had blood. So I think it's interesting that an emotional connection can, in a way, almost hijack the brain and tell it, we don't have a blood connection, but we're going to act like we do, and we're going to sacrifice ourselves if need be for that connection. And I think that's fascinating. Makes sense in a way, because like I said, humans are we're very social creatures. We draw on one another in a lot of times in ways we don't expect, and I think a lot of times, like I mentioned before, our first impulse isn't necessarily a selfish one. And I think that's something people need to kind of remember more often. It's kind of encouraging to hear, I think, sometimes. So that is just a little bit on the ultimate sacrifice trope. Like I said, kind of like anything in psychology, it's going to vary, but all that is required for someone psychologically to make the decision to sacrifice himself is some feeling of kinship, whether it be blood or emotional. And that's interesting. I don't mind this trope. I actually really like it. I just don't like it to be overused, but that's kind of my thing with any trope. There is I know there is a trope of someone sacrificing themselves essentially as trying to make up for a past misdeed, and I will talk about that trope in a later video because I think that's also a very interesting trope. I think that would fall under the redemption trope. I'll have to look it up, but it is on my list. So thank you guys for chiming in for my video. Like I said, I apologize it was late. I hope you guys will chime in for my future videos. Again, they'll be on Sunday and Wednesday from now on. If you guys like this content, make sure that you subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss when I upload. Feel free to leave comments, suggestions below. I will get to them as soon as I can. And until next time, I hope you guys have a good one.